The message arrived during Captain Elena Reeves' morning coffee, which she took black and scalding in the observation deck of Forward Station Arcturus. 3 months stationed here as human military liaison, and she'd learned that most Federation communications could wait until she'd finished caffeine intake. This one couldn't. Priority Transmission Federation. Defense CONCL Captain Reeves. Your presence requested at Tertiary Combat Academy, Vel 9. Cultural Exchange Program. Human Combat Methodology Demonstration for Advanced Tactical Studies. Duration: 2 weeks. Compensation: standard diplomatic rate. Response required within 6 hours. Elena, read it twice. Then check the sender verification 3 times. Legitimate. The Federation wanted humans to teach combat doctrine. After a century of politely declining every similar request, someone high up had apparently decided humanities doesn't translate. Excuse had expired. She pulled up Vel 9's Academy profile. Prestigious institution. 12 species represented in the current cadet class. Instructor Kelth, a heptary with 40 years teaching experience, ran the close quarters combat program using Federation standardized forms techniques, designed for universal application across wildly different BIOLOGI Universal. Elena almost laughed. Nothing about human fighting was universal. Her tablet chimed again. Private channel, Admiral Morrison's personal code. Don't accept. His voice came through rough with concern. I know what you're thinking, but teaching them our methods means teaching them our psychology. They're not ready for that conversation. Maybe that's why they need it, Elena replied, watching a Federation patrol ship glide past the viewport. Sir, they've had 3 generations of peace. That's wonderful. But peace doesn't last because everyone wants it to. It lasts because enough people remember what breaking it costs. Silence on the line. Then, you have 2 weeks. Demonstrate. Don't indoctrinate. Show them why we fight differently, not how. The moment you start teaching actual doctrine, I'm pulling you out. Understood, Elena. Morrison's tone shifted, became almost paternal. You know what this will do to you. Being back in that headspace, treating training partners as threats, measuring every room for weapon potential. You've worked hard to dial that down. She had. 3 years of conscious effort to stop automatically calculating kill counts during diplomatic functions. To walk through station quarters without mapping ambush points. To shake hands without assessing grip strength and joint vulnerability. 2 weeks won't undo 3 years, she said, not entirely believing it. It only takes 1 day to remember what you spent 3 years trying to forget. Morrison sighed. Your choice, Captain. But understand once they see what human combat really means, that knowledge doesn't go back in the box. For them or for you. The connection closed. Elena stared at the response prompt on her tablet, cursor blinking expectantly. Outside, Arcturus Station hummed with the comfortable rhythm of a civilization that had forgotten organized violence was even possible. Dozens of species working together, trading together, building a future where conflict resolution happened through dialogue and arbitration. Beautiful, miraculous. Even her finger hovered over, accept. Somewhere on Earth. Military instructors trained recruits in traditions spanning 10,000 years of warfare. Techniques refined through countless generations of humans killing humans with ever-increasing efficiency. Methods built on the fundamental assumption that your opponent wanted you dead and possessed both intelligence and creativity to achieve that goal. The Federation taught cadets to fight opponents. Humanity taught soldiers to survive predators. She hit accept and immediately regretted it. The confirmation came through instantly, along with travel arrangements and a personal note from Instructor Kelth expressing enthusiasm about learning from humanity's unique martial perspective. The phrasing made Elena's jaw tighten. Unique as If human combat methodology was exotic cuisine instead of distilled trauma spanning millennia, she had 6 hours before departure. Time enough to run through old forms, let muscle memory resurface. Remind her nervous system how to interpret the world through threat assessment rather than social engagement. Time enough to become, once again, the thing the Federation had built 3 generations of peace trying not to need. Elena finished her coffee, now cold, and headed for the station's restricted training facility. If she was going to teach alien cadets why humanity fought differently, she needed to remember why that difference existed. The answer, as always, was written in scars her species still carried. Visible or otherwise, Vel-9's combat training facility gleamed with the antiseptic efficiency of Federation architecture, smooth surfaces, optimal lighting, climate control calibrated for 12 different species comfort zones. Elena stood in the observation gallery, watching instructor Kelf lead 70 cadets through Form 17, a disarming technique designed to work regardless of limb count or bilateral symmetry. They executed it flawlessly, perfectly synchronized, utterly predictable. Beautiful precision, she remarked to Kelf during the break period. The Heptary's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. 40 years of refinement, he said. The Federation's standardization program proved combat effectiveness transcends biology. Every species contributes their strengths. We synthesize optimal techniques. Everyone benefits. What about weaknesses? Elena asked. Kelf's antennae twitched confusion or concern. She couldn't tell. Weaknesses are addressed through progressive training. Form 23 covers low center of gravity opponents. Form 31 compensates for reach disadvantages. We have documented responses for every variable. Every variable you've encountered in controlled conditions, Elena said carefully. What happens when variables don't follow documentation? Before Kelf could respond, a Drelax cadet named Vorch approached. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, scales gleaming emerald under the facility's lighting, muscles built like industrial equipment. His file indicated top marks in combat trials, natural leadership qualities, and the kind of confidence that came from never facing a real threat. Lieutenant Reeves, his voice carried that peculiar bass rumble common to his species. Instructor Kelf mentioned you demonstrate human techniques. We're eager to observe your forms. Forms. The word made Elena's teeth ache. Human combat doesn't really work that way. All martial systems have forms, Vorch insisted. Respectful but firm. Structured sequences that encode principles. How else would you teach consistency? We teach adaptability instead. Elena glanced at Kelf. Mind if I show rather than tell? The Heptary's mandibles spread interest or apprehension. Within Academy safety protocols, certainly. Elena descended to the training floor. 70 cadets arranged themselves in a loose amphitheater formation. 12 species worth of expectant faces and sensory organs. She could feel their anticipation. This was novel entertainment. A curiosity from the species that contributed in engineering brilliance and cultural media to the Federation, but kept their military methodology carefully classified. Anyone volunteer to attack me? Elena asked. Full commitment, whatever technique you're most confident in. Vorch stepped forward immediately. Pride and opportunity, exactly what Elena expected. Permission to use Form 23, Variation C? It's my strongest strike. Use whatever you want, Elena said. That's the point. The Drelax settled into his stance textbook perfect. Weight distribution optimized. Coiled potential energy ready for release. Elena didn't assume a ready position. She stood naturally, hands loose at her sides, appearing completely unprepared. Vorch launched his kick with devastating precision. A mid-level roundhouse designed to crack ribs, perfected through thousands of repetitions. His technique was beautiful. His power was undeniable. His commitment was absolute. Elena raised her left hand, extended her index finger and thumb, and pinched his ankle mid-flight. The physics should have been impossible. 300 pounds of momentum arrested by 2 fingers. Vorch's massive legs simply stopped, frozen in space, while his body remained balanced on 1 foot. The training floor went silent with the kind of quiet that follows miracles or catastrophes. Elena held him there for 3 seconds, her expression unchanged, then released his ankle and stepped back. Vorch stumbled, caught himself, stared at his own leg like it had betrayed him. "Thank you for the demonstration," Elena said, already walking back toward the observation gallery. Really illustrated the point. She didn't specify which point. Behind her, 70 cadets from 12 species processed what they'd witnessed. Instructor Kel's mandibles locked open in involuntary stress response. The training floor's comfortable assumptions about physics, biology, and combat methodology lay scattered like broken equipment. Vorch remained motionless on the mat, his scales flickering between emerald and darker shades, indicating profound embarrassment. He opened his mouth twice before managing words. "How?" But Elena had already left, the gallery door hissing shut behind her, leaving the cadets with a question that couldn't be answered by consulting their manuals, because human combat doctrine didn't come from manuals. It came from 10,000 years of humans killing humans with such efficiency that survival required treating every interaction as potential violence, every peaceful moment as temporary ceasefire, every extended hand as something that might close into a fist. The Federation had built 3 generations of peace on mutual trust. Humanity had earned its place in that peace by never forgetting what trust looked like when it broke. The observation lounge's floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Velez, 9's twin moons rising over meticulously maintained training grounds. Vorch sat alone with a datapad displaying Form 23, Variation C, the kick he perfected over 4 years of dedicated training. The same kick that had simply stopped existing when it met 2 human fingers. The door chimed. Talon entered first, her crystalline quorum physiology refracting the lounge's ambient lighting into geometric patterns. Jox followed, his 4 Kaline arms carrying data tablets and what looked like medical analysis equipment. "You're reviewing the footage," Talon observed. Not a question. Quorum dealt in certainties, or they didn't speak. "5th time," Vorch admitted. "Force dispersion patterns don't match any biological model in the database." She should have broken fingers. Should have been knocked backward. The momentum had to go somewhere. "It did," Jack said, his secondary arms manipulating a holographic replay. "Watch her trapezius, her obliques, even her opposite calf muscles that aren't connected to the kinetic chain of catching your kick. Somehow her entire body absorbed and dispersed the impact, like she's one integrated system instead of separate muscle groups." Talon's crystalline features remained impassive, but her fingers traced mathematical notations in the air. In basic quorum, her body violated force mechanics by treating discrete systems as unified whole. Should be impossible. Clearly isn't. Therefore, our understanding is incomplete. They watched the replay again. The moment of contact, the impossible stop, Vorch's frozen leg. "There's a rumor," Jock said quietly, his voice dropping to the registered Kaline used for uncomfortable truths. "Among auxiliary corps personnel who've served alongside human military units. They say human combat doctrine doesn't translate. That's the official phrase in every request denial. Not classified, not restricted. Doesn't translate. That's diplomatically phrased xenophobia," Vorch growled. "Every martial tradition can be broken into teachable components. The Federation proved that with standardization. Did they?" Talon's question hung in the recycled air. Or did they standardize what could be standardized and declare victory without acknowledging what they'd left out? The three cadets stared at the frozen image, Elena's fingers, Vorch's ankle, the impossible physics. "She's in the historical archives," Jack said suddenly. "Saw her heading there an hour ago. We could just ask. Ask her to explain how she violated fundamental physics." Vorch's scales rippled with skepticism. "She gave us diplomatic non-answers about cultural differences. Then we frame it differently," Talon said, already moving toward the door with characteristic quorum determination. "We tell her we want to understand, not replicate. Appeal to intellectual curiosity. Humans value knowledge acquisition. Their entire history is sequential bad decisions, driven by need to know things they shouldn't. That's also xenophobic," Jax pointed out. But he was already following. Vorch remained seated another moment, looking at his own frozen image in the hologram. 24 hours ago, he'd been confident in his combat prowess. Now he knew with certainty that he understood considerably less about violence than he believed. He killed the projection and followed the others, because wounded pride was temporarily less important than wounded understanding. The historical combat archives occupied a neglected section of the Academy's educational wing. Inside, holographic storage units hummed quietly, containing centuries of martial traditions from dozens of species, all neatly categorized, analyzed, and ultimately homogenized into Federation standardized forms. Elena sat surrounded by floating displays showing Earth combat footage. Humans in various protective gear, hitting each other in ways that looked less like training and more like mutual attempted murder. "You're researching Earth martial arts." Talon announced their presence with quorum, formality stating the obvious as revelation. Elena didn't look up from a display showing two humans grappling, one slowly choking the other unconscious while a referee watched impassively. "Sharp observation. We want to understand what happened today," Jack said, his primary arm spread in Kelline non-aggression gesture. "Not to challenge you. To learn." "Learning implies you can apply the knowledge," Elena replied, finally turning to face them. Her expression remained unreadable. "Can't apply what you can't contextualize. Can't contextualize what you're not prepared to accept." Vorch's scales flickered orange frustration. "Stop being cryptic. You caught my kick with 2 fingers. Either that's a teachable technique or you're biologically different enough that you shouldn't be classified as baseline human. Which is it?" Elena studied them for a long moment. Something in her posture shifted, not relaxation, but a lowering of invisible guard. "All right," she said. "I'll explain. But we're doing this properly. You need to see something first, and you're going to be uncomfortable. I need you to sit with that discomfort instead of immediately trying to logic it away or dismiss it as human barbarism. Deal?" "Define uncomfortable," Talon requested. "The kind where you'll understand why your instructors don't teach human combat doctrine, and you'll wish you still didn't know." Elena stood, gesturing toward a restricted holodeck access panel. "Because once I show you, you can't unknow it." That ignorance was protecting something important. The 3 cadets exchanged glances. Talon's analytical. Jax is uncertain. Vorch is stubborn. "Show us," Vorch said. Elena's smile held no humor. "You're going to regret that in about 15 minutes. But sure, let's go learn something you'll never be able to teach." The restricted holodeck hummed to life with low-frequency vibration, suggesting expensive hardware doing computationally intensive work. Elena stood at the control panel while the 3 cadets arranged themselves behind her. The walls dissolved into historical recreation.Earth, approximately 3,000 years before present. Southeast Asian Peninsula. 2 humans stood in a ring of shouting spectators. No armor, minimal padding. They began hitting each other with their shins, This is Muay Thai, Elena said, her voice taking on the flat affect of someone delivering information they knew would be rejected. Traditional combat sport from Thailand. Notice the conditioning. They've been striking wooden posts with their shins since childhood. Microfractures heal harder, denser. By adulthood, their legs are organic clubs capable of shattering ribs, collarbones, orbital sockets. Jocks' secondary arms twitched. They're deliberately damaging their own skeletal structure for marginal combat advantage. Not marginal. Decisive against unconditioned opponents. One clean shin kick ends the fight. The scene shifted. Japan, perhaps 1,500 years ago. Two figures in loose clothing grappled on tatami mats, one methodically bending the other's arm, backward until the joint gave way with an audible pop that made Talon's crystalline structure resonate sympathetically. Jiu-jitsu. Designed by a smaller feudal class to kill armored opponents. They couldn't strike effectively, so every technique targets joints, ligaments, blood flow to the brain. 47 ways to dislocate a shoulder in the classical curriculum. 63 choking methods, each with variations depending on whether you want unconsciousness or death. The hologram cycled forward. Israel, 20th century. A woman in military fatigues, demonstrating techniques on a training dummy with cold efficiency. Eye gouges. Throat strikes. Groin attacks. Each movement designed to maximize damage in minimum time. Krav Maga. Developed for a population surrounded by hostile neighbors who'd been trying to exterminate them for generations. No sport applications, no point system. Every sequence ends with the opponent incapacitated or dead because the founding assumption is that if they're still mobile, they're still a threat. Vorch's scales had gone pale emerald Drellak's biological response to conceptual distress. These aren't martial arts. These are assassination protocols. Now you're catching on. Elena changed the display again. Russia, exact or unclear. A man moving through attackers with no fixed stance, no recognizable patterns, somehow always positioned exactly where he needed to be to make violence effortless. Systema. No forms, no kata, no techniques in the way your manuals define them. Just principles of biomechanics and psychological response applied in real time. Watch, he's not faster than his opponents. He's reading their intent before they've committed to action, positioning himself where their attacks become structurally unsound. Talon's voice emerged with uncharacteristic uncertainty. That requires processing threat vectors faster than conscious thought allows. Correct. Which is why Systema takes 20 years to develop basic competency. Your nervous system has to rewire itself to treat violence as a language you speak fluently, instead of a problem you solve consciously. Elena paused the display, leaving the Systema practitioner frozen mid-motion. His body language readable as text to anyone who'd learned the grammar. Want to see more? I've got Silat, Wing Chun, Krav Maga's uglier cousins from 6 different continents. Hundreds of systems, most of them extinct now. All designed around the same core assumption. Which is? Jocks asked, though his tone suggested he already knew and desperately didn't want confirmation. That the person you're fighting wants you dead. And the only acceptable outcome is reversing that intention before they succeed. Elena killed the hologram entirely, leaving them in the holodeck's default neutral gray. Your Federation combat doctrine works beautifully because it assumes baseline competence on both sides. Rule following, mutual understanding that this is a structured contest with boundaries. Human martial arts assume your opponent is an intelligent predator with no boundaries who will exploit any hesitation, any mercy, any assumption that shared sapience means shared restraint. The silence felt pressurized, like atmosphere before a storm. Talon's crystalline fingers traced mathematical patterns, nervous habit when confronted with data that didn't fit existing models. But humans live in the Federation now, she said finally. You've had peace with other species for over a century. Why maintain traditions built for mutual slaughter? Elena leaned against the control panel, her posture deliberately casual in a way that somehow made her more threatening. Because peace is a choice, Talon, not a natural state. Every species in the Federation chose it because the alternatives were worse economically, politically, strategically. But choices can be unmade. And on the day someone decides our peace is less valuable than whatever they gain by breaking it, I want my species to remember how we survived 10,000 years of being our own worst enemy. That's paranoia, Vorch said. But his scales flickered uncertain colors. No, paranoia is irrational fear. This is pattern recognition applied to history. Elena pulled up a timeline showing Earth's conflicts, an unbroken chain of warfare stretching back to prehistory. Wars overlapping wars. Peace treaties serving as intermissions rather than conclusions. My species spent more time killing each other than not. We got very, very good at it. Then we met you, and suddenly we have this novel problem beings we could talk to, trade with, who weren't automatically threats. It's been wonderful. But we remember what we are when the talking stops. Jox's forearms wrapped around himself, Caline's self-comfort gesture. So, when you caught Vorch's kick, you weren't using a technique from your manuals? We don't have manuals in the way you mean them. We have living traditions passed instructor to student, adapted generation by generation. Each one slightly different because the threats evolved. What I used was... Elena paused, searching for words. Imagine you speak a language your whole life. Then someone asks you to diagram a sentence grammatically. You can speak it fluently, but explaining the rules is harder than using them. That kick came at me. My body recognized the threat vector, and training I've maintained since I was 12 years old provided the response. I couldn't write it down as steps. It's not steps, it's fluency. In violence, Talon said quietly. In survival, violence is just the application. 3 days into her assignment, Elena stood in Instructor Kel's office while the Heptari reviewed incident reports with mounting distress. His mandibles clicked rapidly stress pattern she'd learned to recognize. 7 cadets have requested transfers to other academies, Kel said, his compound eyes reflecting holographic beta. 12 more have filed formal complaints about psychological distress. The Quorum Ethics Board sent an inquiry about whether human combat philosophy constitutes harmful ideology. Captain Reeves, your demonstration has created significant disruption. I showed them historical footage, Elena replied calmly. Nothing classified, nothing graphic beyond what their own combat training involves. They asked to understand. I provided context that has fundamentally undermined their confidence in Federation doctrine. Kel's antennae drooped. Cadet Vorch hasn't participated in drills since your archive session. He sits in observation lounges calculating threat assessments instead of training. Cadet Talon filed a mathematical proof demonstrating that our standardized forms only function in cooperative scenarios. Cadet Jax has started mapping escape routes from every room he enters. So they're learning, Elena said. They're becoming paranoid. Kel's voice rose to a pitch that made his species' distress unmistakable. Your methods don't teach combat. They teach fear. Constant vigilance. Treating every interaction as potential violence. That's not martial tradition, Lieutenant. That's trauma. The words hit harder than Elena expected. She'd spent 3 years trying to dial down exactly those responses. 3 years learning that not every extended hand hit a weapon, that peaceful moments could stay peaceful, that the galaxy contained cooperation as well as competition. But 3 days back in teaching mode had resurged every old habit. She'd been automatically threat assessing station personnel, mapping ambush points in corridors, calculating how many seconds each species in the mess hall would take to become dangerous if they chose violence. "You're right," she said quietly. "It is trauma. 10,000 years of it refined into doctrine." "Then why teach it?" Kelth asked, genuine confusion in his clicking. "Why maintain traditions built on assumptions your species no longer faces? You live in a civilization where those threats don't exist, don't they?" Elena pulled up her datapad, displaying recent intelligence reports. Frontier colony on Kepler 79. Human settlement. Local Drelax administrator imposed resource restrictions, targeting human-specific needs, different atmospheric requirements, dietary supplements. Perfectly legal under Federation resource allocation protocols. Also perfectly designed to make human presence unsustainable. She swiped to another report. Trading Station Epsilon 6. Human merchants consistently denied premium docking slots despite matching credentials and fees. When they complained, station authorities cited cultural integration concerns. Again, technically legal discrimination. Kelth's mandibles slowed their clicking. Those are administrative disputes, not martial conflicts. Yet, they're not martial conflicts yet. Elena closed her datapad. Violence isn't just physical force, instructor. It's any action designed to harm, constrain, or eliminate another being's agency. What's happening on those colonies is structural violence. And my species learned through extremely painful experience that structural violence is how physical violence gets normalized. You don't go from peace to war overnight. You go through gradual escalation where each step seems reasonable until suddenly you're killing each other and nobody can remember exactly when it became acceptable. She met his compound eyes directly. The Federation built 3 generations of peace. That's miraculous. But peace doesn't maintain itself through good intentions. It maintains itself because enough people remember what breaking it costs. And that memory makes them vigilant about escalation patterns. You asked why we maintain our traditions. Because forgetting how to recognize threats doesn't make you safer. It just makes you slower to respond when threats emerge. Kelth was silent for a long moment. Outside his office window, cadets from a dozen species trained together in the afternoon sun, executing standardized forms with synchronized precision. The android activated with pneumatic hiss, its sensor array glowing amber. Standard operating parameters, human baseline strength, Federation combat protocols. Predictable response patterns. Elena addressed the assembled cadets instead of the machine. Everything Instructor Kelth taught you works perfectly within its design parameters. Your forms are elegant. Your techniques are effective. Your training is comprehensive. She gestured at the android. Against opponents who share those parameters. The android moved forward, executing Form 12 textbook perfect disarming sequence. Elena redirected it with minimal motion, not blocking or countering, but simply occupying space where the technique's structure became unsound. The android adjusted mid-sequence, exactly as programmed. Notice it compensates according to doctrine, Elena continued, evading the follow-up strike. Predictable adaptation based on predetermined decision trees. This is how Federation combat works: mutual improvisation within agreed parameters. She caught the android's wrist, applied leverage, brought it off balance. Now watch what happens when parameters change. Elena nodded to Kelth. Activate human aggression protocols. The Heptari hesitated, mandibles locking briefly. Then he input the command sequence. The android's optical sensors shifted from amber to deep crimson. Its posture changed, not into any recognizable ready stance, but into something that looked almost relaxed. Almost. Then it moved, not toward Elena, but at her, closing distance with footwork that didn't match any training manual. It feinted high, committed low, then abandoned the attack entirely when Elena moved to counter. creating an opening that vanished before it could be exploited. When Elena attempted a standard deflection, the android didn't block the prescribed targets, struck her elbow joint mid-extension, disrupting the kinetic chain before the technique could develop structure. Elena stumbled backward. The android pursued without ceremony, without flourish, targeting joints and balance points with cold efficiency. For 30 seconds, the assembled cadets watched their human instructor struggle against a machine programmed with data from species who'd spent millennia perfecting violence against their own kind. Then Elena stopped trying to fight the way Federation doctrine taught. Her body language shifted. Subtle changes in weight distribution, breathing pattern, threat focus. She stopped treating the android as opponent following rules and started treating it as predator, operating without them. The engagement transformed. Elena's movements became simultaneously more fluid and more precise, occupying spaces that shouldn't have existed in the combat geometry. She wasn't faster than the android. She was reading its algorithmic intent before execution. Positioning herself where its attacks became structurally unsound, not because she blocked them, but because she made them geometrically impossible. 14 seconds. That's how long it took her to reduce a 7-foot combat android to twitching collection of servos and broken connections. She stepped back from the wreckage, breathing harder now, and turned to face the silent training hall. Human combat methodology doesn't make us stronger or faster, she said. It makes us more willing to accept that violence exists, that intelligent beings can choose it despite shared sapience, and that survival requires treating that possibility as constant rather than exception. Vorch rose from his position in the observation tiers. His scales flickered between colors, processing, acceptance, something like understanding. "You're teaching us to live in fear," he said, not accusatory, but seeking clarity. "No," Elena replied. "I'm teaching you to live with awareness that fear is rational response to genuine threats, and that threats don't stop existing because acknowledging them is uncomfortable. Your Federation built 3 generations of peace by choosing cooperation over competition. That's miraculous. But choice requires capacity. You can't meaningfully choose peace if you've forgotten what alternatives look like." Talon's crystalline voice emerged from another tier. "You're saying we need capacity for violence to make peace meaningful? I'm saying that beings who can't defend boundaries don't establish treaties. They accept terms. There's a difference between cooperation among equals and submission by the powerless to the powerful." Elena gestured at the destroyed android. "Your doctrine works beautifully for the former. It fails catastrophically for the latter. And the galaxy contains both, whether you've acknowledged that or not." Kelf descended from the control station, moving with unusual deliberation. His mandibles clicked in patterns Elena had learned to interpret as careful consideration. "Captain Reeves," he said formally, "would you consent to teaching a supplementary module? Not replacing our current doctrine, but addressing scenarios where standard parameters fail?" Elena looked at the assembled cadets. 70 faces across 12 species, all of them processing uncomfortable truths about the civilization they'd believed was built on inevitable harmony rather than sustained choice. "No," she said quietly, "because teaching you my methods means teaching you to see the world through trauma-informed perception, to calculate threat potentials during casual interactions, to never fully relax because relaxation is when predators strike. That mindset served my species through 10,000 years of killing each other, but it's not the mindset that builds the Federation you want to preserve." She moved toward the exit, then paused. "But I'll teach you one thing, how to recognize when structural violence is escalating toward physical violence. Not how to commit it, how to identify the patterns so you can intervene before that threshold is crossed. That's what you actually need." Not human combat doctrine, but human pattern recognition applied to preserving peace rather than winning wars. The training hall remained silent. Finally, Vorch descended to the mat, approaching Elena directly. He extended his massive hand relaxed gesture of respect between equals. "Teach us that," he said. "Please." Elena took his hand, noting automatically that his grip strength could crush her fingers if he chose. That his center of mass made him vulnerable to specific takedowns. That his scales would resist certain strikes but be susceptible to joint manipulations. She stopped that analysis consciously, deliberately, chose peace over paranoia, cooperation over calculation. "All right," she said. "Let's learn to preserve what you've built." 6 months after Elena's assignment ended, she sat in forward station Arcturus observation deck reviewing reports from Vel. 9. Instructor Kelth had implemented supplementary coursework on structural violence recognition and de-escalation, dry bureaucratic title for teaching cadets to identify threat patterns before they became kinetic conflicts. Early results were promising. Cadets trained in the new methodology had successfully identified and reported 3 separate cases of administrative discrimination, escalating toward violence on frontier colonies. In each case, early intervention through proper federation channels prevented what might have become physical confrontations, but the reports also noted concerning trends. Some cadets were developing hypervigilance symptoms. Others showed reduced trust in institutional frameworks. A few requested psychological counseling for intrusive thoughts about threat scenarios. Elena's datapad chimed. Admiral Morrison's personal channel. "You created exactly what I warned you about." His voice carried weary resignation. Cadets who can't unsee threats now that they've learned to recognize them. Was it worth it? Elena watched a Federation patrol ship glide past a viewport symbol of a civilization that had chosen cooperation over competition, trust over paranoia, shared prosperity over zero-sum conflict. "Ask me again in 50 years, she replied. "When we know whether teaching them pattern recognition helped preserve peace or just traumatized a generation for no reason." "Not very reassuring, Captain." "Peace never is. The comfortable illusion that it's inevitable and self-maintaining that's reassuring. Actual peace requires constant maintenance, boundary enforcement, willingness to identify and address threats while they're still addressable. That's exhausting. But it's how you keep choosing cooperation when competition would be easier." Silence on the line. "Then, you sound tired." "I am. I spent 3 years learning to stop seeing threats everywhere. Took me 2 weeks at Vel 9 to fall back into old patterns. I'm back to calculating kill counts during diplomatic functions again." "So your teaching failed," Morrison said gently. "You wanted to give them awareness without trauma, but trauma is inseparable from the awareness." "Maybe," Elena admitted. "Or maybe that's the cost. Maybe truly preserving peace requires some people to carry the burden of remembering what breaking it looks like. Not everyone just enough to maintain institutional memory, recognize patterns, intervene before escalation becomes irreversible." Another patrol ship passed, this one escorting a civilian transport. 12 species traveling together, trading together, building futures together in a galaxy where cooperation had replaced conquest as dominant paradigm. The Federation worked for 3 generations without human pattern recognition, Morrison pointed out. It could probably work another 3 the same way. Probably, Elena agreed. But structural cracks in Kepler 7-9, Epsilon 6, Vel 3, those don't appear overnight. They accumulate slowly while everyone's busy believing peace is inevitable. I gave Kelth's cadets tools to recognize accumulation before it becomes catastrophic. Whether they use those tools wisely or let them become neurosis, that's their choice now. She closed the reports, set aside her datapad, picked up her coffee. Still hot this time. Human combat doctrine doesn't translate into Federation framework, she continued. You were right about that. But human threat pattern recognition, that translates. Not perfectly, not without cost, but enough to maybe give them what we had to learn the hard way. That peace is a choice requiring continuous maintenance, not a default state requiring no effort. Morrison sighed. You know they're writing papers about you. Human exceptionalism in martial context. Trauma-informed combat philosophy. The psychological cost of vigilance. You've become academic case study in whether security requires sacrifice of comfort. Good, Elena said. Let them debate it. Let them struggle with the question of whether the price of awareness is worth paying. That struggle is healthier than assumed inevitability ever was. The connection closed. Elena returned her attention to the viewport. Watching ships move through carefully regulated traffic patterns in space that had once been empty frontier, now filled with civilization built on mutual trust. Her hands still automatically calculated threat vectors. Her nervous system still processed every station corridor for ambush potential. Her training still treated peace as temporary condition requiring constant monitoring. But for the first time in 6 months, she felt something like acceptance. Not of this hypervigilance that remained exhausting burden her species carried forward from 10,000 years of trauma, but acceptance that maybe some burdens needed carrying. That maybe peace was preserved not through everyone forgetting violence was possible, but through some people remembering it clearly enough to recognize when it started becoming acceptable again. Outside the viewport, the galaxy continued its miraculous experiment in cooperation across species boundaries. Inside the observation deck, one human officer maintained vigilance born from remembering when that cooperation failed. Both were necessary. Both were exhausting. Both were the price of choosing peace. Instead of assuming it, Alana finished her coffee and returned to duty, carrying humanity's ancient burden into a future that hoped it would never be needed, but was grateful. Perhaps that someone remembered how to bear it. Just in case. Epilogue, Transmission Log. Valmine Academy 6 months post-integration Instruct Health. Structural Violence. Recognition Module Completion Rate, 92%. Threat Pattern Identification Scores exceed baseline by 47%. Psychological counseling requests up 63%. Overall assessment. Methodology effective, cost significant, trade-offs remain under evaluation. Cadet Vorch, personal log. I see threats now. Can't unsee them. But I also see intervention points, moments where structural violence can be addressed before escalation. Maybe that's the lesson. Not that threats don't exist, but that awareness creates opportunity for prevention. Still processing whether this knowledge improves my service potential or just makes everything harder. Possibly both. Cadet Talon. Mathematical analysis. Probability calculations suggest federation. Peace sustained not through inevitability, but through accumulated small choices favoring cooperation over competition. Human pattern recognition identifies moments where those choices become critical. Statistical value, significant. Psychological cost, also significant. Optimal solution remains undefined. Further data required. Captain Elena Reeves' final report. Assignment complete. Taught threat recognition without teaching violence. Cadets now carry awareness they cannot unlearn. Whether this preserves Federation peace longer than ignorance would have managed remains unknown. But they have the tools now. What they build with them is their choice. That's all peace ever was, a choice we make, again and again, until choosing becomes habit. May they choose wisely,